The church bells rang. The guests stood waiting, but the groom never came. Alone outside the little white church, a heartbroken bride watched the last wagon disappear down the dusty road. Believing her future had vanished with it, she had nowhere to go. No family waiting, no home to return to. Just as the sun began to set, a quiet rancher stopped his horse, looked into her tear-filled eyes, and asked one simple question. "Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight?" She silently shook her head. The rancher tipped his hat and replied, "Then my door is open." Neither of them knew that one act of kindness would become the beginning of a love story the entire frontier would one day remember. Stay until the end, because this unforgettable journey proves that sometimes the life you lose is only making room for the one you were always meant to live. If you enjoy heartwarming Wild West stories filled with love, hope, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more unforgettable stories. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the little frontier town of Willow Creek as church bells echoed across the valley. Neighbors gathered outside the white wooden church wearing their finest clothes, smiling as they waited for a wedding that never happened. Inside, flowers decorated the altar, candles flickered softly, and every seat was filled with hopeful faces. At the front of the church stood 24-year-old Sarah Collins, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last. The preacher glanced nervously toward the open doors while guests whispered among themselves. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the painful truth settled over the room like a cold winter wind. The groom was never coming. Some guests quietly slipped away, avoiding Sarah's tear-filled eyes. Others offered awkward words of sympathy before climbing into their wagons and leaving. By sunset, the church stood almost empty. Sarah remained outside, still wearing her simple cream-colored wedding dress beneath a faded blue shawl. She had traveled hundreds of miles believing she would begin a new life with a man who had promised her love through countless letters. Instead, she had been abandoned before even speaking her wedding vows. She had sold nearly everything she owned to make the journey west. There was no money for another stagecoach, no family waiting elsewhere, and nowhere she could call home. Fighting back tears, she sat quietly on the church steps, wondering if this lonely frontier town would become the place where all her dreams ended. As darkness slowly crept across the valley, rancher Caleb Dawson guided his horse along the dusty road after delivering supplies to a neighboring farm. Caleb was known throughout the county as a hard-working man of few words. Years earlier, he had planned a future of his own until illness claimed the woman he loved before they could marry. Since then, he had buried himself in work, believing his quiet ranch would remain empty forever. Yet, despite his own heartbreak, he never ignored someone in need. As he rode past the church, he noticed the lonely bride sitting alone beneath the fading evening sky. Her bouquet rested forgotten beside her, and tears silently rolled down her cheeks. Caleb slowed his horse, removed his hat respectfully, and climbed down. He didn't ask why she was crying. He didn't demand explanations. Instead, he simply stood beside her for a quiet moment before speaking gently. "Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight?" Sarah lowered her eyes and slowly shook her head. That single answer told Caleb everything he needed to know. Looking at the frightened young woman who had already suffered enough humiliation for one lifetime, he spoke with calm sincerity. "Then my door is open." Sarah looked up in surprise. After the worst day of her life, she had expected pity, judgment, or empty apologies. Instead, a complete stranger had offered kindness without asking for anything in return. Caleb picked up her small suitcase, helped her into the wagon, and turned the horses toward his ranch as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the rolling hills. Behind them, the little white church faded into the distance. Ahead of them waited a quiet ranch where two lonely hearts, both carrying painful memories, would soon discover that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as life's greatest disappointments. Neither Sarah nor Caleb realized that this unexpected meeting on a lonely church road would become the first chapter of a love story the people of Willow Creek would tell for generations. Caleb welcomed Sarah to his ranch with quiet respect, asking for nothing except that she feel safe. He showed her the small guest room, where his late mother's handmade quilt still rested neatly on the bed, and assured her she could stay as long as she needed. The lonely ranch house had been silent for years, but Sarah's gentle presence slowly brought warmth back into every room. She thanked Caleb by helping with daily chores, baking fresh bread, mending torn clothes, and tending the small flower garden that had been neglected since his loss. Every morning they worked side by side without many words, yet their silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Caleb admired Sarah's strength, while Sarah discovered that beneath the quiet rancher's reserved nature was a heart filled with compassion. For the first time since being abandoned at the church, she found herself smiling again. The sunset seemed brighter, the laughter easier, and the future no longer felt so frightening. News of the jilted bride living at Caleb's ranch quickly spread through Willow Creek. Some neighbors whispered that it would never last, while others questioned whether two broken hearts could truly heal together. Caleb ignored every rumor. He cared far more about Sarah's happiness than the town's opinions. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the rolling hills, Sarah quietly apologized for bringing trouble into his peaceful life. Caleb looked at her with a gentle smile and replied, "You never brought trouble. You brought life back into a home that had forgotten how to hope." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she realized the man who had opened his door had also quietly opened his heart. The woman who believed her life had ended on the church steps was about to discover that her greatest blessing was only beginning, and soon the entire town would witness a love story far more beautiful than the wedding that never happened. A few months later, the little white church in Willow Creek was filled once again. The same people who had witnessed Sarah's heartbreak returned, but this time their faces carried smiles instead of sympathy. Fresh wildflowers decorated the pews, sunlight streamed through the windows, and the church bells rang with joy rather than disappointment. At the front of the aisle stood Caleb, waiting patiently with quiet confidence. When Sarah entered, wearing a simple ivory dress and carrying a bouquet of fresh wildflowers, every person in the room stood in admiration. The woman who had once believed her life was over now walked forward with hope shining in her eyes. As she reached the altar, Caleb gently took her hands and said, "The day I opened my door, I never imagined God was sending me the greatest blessing of my life." Fighting back tears, Sarah smiled and replied, "The day I lost everything, I thought my story had ended. Instead, it was only leading me to you." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and joyful applause filled the little church. The same road where Sarah had once cried alone became the road where she and Caleb rode home together as a family. The years that followed turned the Dawson Ranch into one of the happiest homes in the valley. Sarah filled every room with laughter, music, and kindness, while Caleb discovered that love could bloom again even after years of grief. Their home became a place where weary travelers were always welcomed with a warm meal, an open fire, and the same compassion Caleb had once shown a stranger sitting alone outside a church. Whenever people asked Sarah how she had found such happiness after such heartbreak, she would smile and say, "Sometimes God closes one door because He's already opened a better one." The people of Willow Creek never forgot the story of the abandoned bride and the quiet rancher who changed her life with one simple act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes in hope, second chances, and true love. Remember, the door that seems to close on your dreams may only be guiding you toward the home where you truly belong.